A worldview is the lens through which a society understands its place in the universe. For centuries in medieval Europe, that lens was locked firmly in place. Life was a waiting room. You survived, obeyed, and looked toward the afterlife. You can see this mindset physically recorded in how Europeans mapped their reality. This is the medieval Psalter world map. It's not a navigational tool meant to help you sail from point A to point B. Notice the dead center. That's Jerusalem. Geography in this era was entirely spiritual, revolving around the holy city. Looking down over the entire system is a divine figure holding the world. Life was directed by divine will, not human choice. In this rigid feudal pyramid, humans saw themselves as passive subjects. You were born into a class and you stayed there, waiting for the next life rather than trying to alter your current station. Then, in 1348, a microscopic bacteria fractured that system. This manuscript illustration shows the chaotic reality of the Black Death, as victims were lowered into mass graves. Millions died across the continent. With so much of the population gone, fields sat rotting. Suddenly, there was a severe shortage of people to actually do the work. The surviving peasants realized their labor was incredibly valuable. They began demanding higher wages and actively revolting against the lords who had owned their time for generations. At the same time, the church proved completely powerless to stop the dying. Prayers and processions did nothing to halt the plague, and deep, widespread skepticism took root. This combination of economic rebellion and religious doubt broke the absolute grip of the medieval mindset. It left behind a massive intellectual and structural vacuum in European society. That vacuum was filled first in the Italian city-states. Places like Florence and Venice were perfectly positioned geographically to dominate Mediterranean trade routes between Europe and the East. This intense commerce birthed a new urban elite. For the first time, social power was dictated by the money you could generate, rather than the land your family inherited. Along with exotic goods, these trade routes brought an influx of forgotten ideas. Islamic and Jewish scholars in places like Cordoba, Spain, had spent centuries preserving and expanding upon the ancient texts of Greece and Rome. The new Italian merchants had massive amounts of disposable wealth, and they spent it acquiring, translating, and studying this recovered mathematics, science, and philosophy. When this sudden surge of wealth collided with classical knowledge, it created an intellectual shift called humanism. Society's attention turned away from the afterlife and focused sharply on human potential in the present. Humanism wasn't kept hidden in quiet libraries. Wealthy patrons used it as a public display of individual achievement and intense confidence. Look at Brunelleschi's dome crowning the Florence Cathedral. Building a freestanding structure of this massive scale required complex new hoisting machines and a fierce belief in human engineering. Art underwent a similar transformation. We see a complete departure from flat medieval icons. Here, in Michelangelo's David, the focus is entirely on anatomical precision, reason, and physical presence. Artists explicitly elevated classical thinkers to the same tier as saints. This fresco is Raphael's The School of Athens, placing ancient philosophers like Aristotle and Plato inside a revered architectural space. These masterpieces served as tangible proof that humanity had adopted a bold new identity, one capable of shaping its own destiny. This intellectual shift might have stayed an Italian curiosity if not for Johannes Gutenberg. His invention of the mechanical printing press shattered the church's strict monopoly on knowledge. This map illustrates the explosion of early printing presses, starting in Germany and Italy, then rapidly multiplying across the continent. Books suddenly became cheap to produce, and literacy rates skyrocketed. Everyday people could now read classical texts and the Bible in their own languages. They no longer had to rely on a priest or a lord to tell them how the world worked. The printing press ensured these ideas could not be contained. It broke the institutional monopoly on information, leaving individual readers to judge the truth for themselves. Armed with this new mindset, individuals began to challenge the oldest established truths. This is Nicolaus Copernicus's heliocentric diagram, visually proving his claim that the Earth actually orbits the Sun, physically displacing humanity from the center of the universe. That same bold confidence pushed Europeans to look across the oceans. To bypass Arab monopolies on the spice trade, sailors relied on new maritime technology, like this complex brass astrolabe, to precisely navigate the open seas. This drive to investigate the unknown, combined with the economic pressure to find new routes to Asia, turned the Atlantic into the next frontier. The Renaissance established a new precedent for the Western world. It replaced a culture of passive endurance with one defined by observation, effort, and the belief that humans can build their own future.